Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership podcast. My name is Kevin Goldsmith. As always, I am your host. I have been a developer, a engineering manager, a senior engineering manager, director, VP, CTO in technology for now going on 35 years. I have been on this path for a while. And in this podcast, I share with you lessons from my own experience that I hope can help you if you're on this journey yourself. Today, we're talking about working with the CEO. This is inherently something that is more important and critical at the VP and CTO level. But if you work in a smaller company, you probably have direct access to the CEO as well. And if you're hoping someday to be a VP of engineering or a CTO, this is probably worth understanding before you get to that level so that you can do the job effectively. It's weird. I swear that I created the outline for this podcast a week ago. And maybe because I had this in my head, or maybe this is just the way the world works, I've had 4 separate conversations with people I mentor this week about that specific relationship, CTOs or a VP in one case, who have been having challenges with their CEO lately and wanted to talk through that. From these 4 different conversations, but also just from my own experience, there's a lot of different versions of the same problem, which is how to work productively with a CEO whose style, priorities, or decision-making process is really different from your own. One of the people I mentor is navigating a challenge with a CEO who's really deep in operational weeds and leaves the strategic thinking to everybody else. Another person has a founder CEO who has very strong technology opinions and comes from sort of a technology background, but hasn't been in the details in a long time. And a third just realized that the CEO has been making decisions affecting their team without actually discussing it with them. Another person I spoke to this week was having problems with her CEO because her CEO, especially with AI, a lot of CEOs will vibe code something and think, okay, well, I built this thing in a minute. Why can't the engineering team build the real version of this in a few minutes? AI has demystified the technology for a lot of non-technical CEOs, but in a way that's not necessarily realistic. And so she was trying to figure out, how does she have the conversation with the CEO of what you vibe coded is valuable, but it's not just a process of taking what you did and then we'll have it ready for customers tomorrow. That's a lot of us in senior executive leadership right now. Is AI is giving a lot of our peers the illusion that building software is now free or instant, and it's a lot faster, but they don't understand the parts that they don't understand. 4 people, 4 completely different situations, all asking some version of the same question, which is, how do I make this work? I've reported to, I think, 6 CEOs, different styles, different personalities, different size companies. And what I've seen is that every one of those relationships has been fundamentally different, but it's not because of their specific personality, although obviously that's going to come up in a one-to-one relationship, which is what this is. But it's also what the CEO cared about, what they expected from me, and how much room there was for honest disagreement. The lesson that keeps coming back is that the relationship itself is something you have to build deliberately. It doesn't just happen because you're both competent. The CTO or VP to CEO relationship is structurally asymmetric in ways that make it different from any other working relationship. The CEO hired you, or they came in and chose not to let you go. They can fire you. They can set your comp. They determine how much room you have to operate. Now, that's not different than any other boss-employee relationship, but usually they also depend on your judgment in domains that they can't often evaluate themselves. You know things about the state of the business that they need to hear honestly. There's another aspect of this, which I've talked about in prior episodes, which is also that not only do they not necessarily understand your area, and they're definitely not up on the details on it day to day because they're running the whole business, but you also have very narrow pathways of communication with them just by the nature of the work. So you'll have your one-on-one, you'll have your exec team meeting, you might have other conversations real time during that week. But those narrow kind of windows that they see into your organization means that they really don't understand what's going on in your part of the company. That's the same for marketing or sales or whatever. They're reliant on you to keep them informed. So you also have to be very judicious on what you're surfacing and when you're surfacing it to them and where you do visibility, and how you do that communication will also highly impact the relationship you have with the CEO, and finding that right level of communication with them is another thing that's different. Boss-employee relationship. You need to be close enough to influence, independent enough to be honest, and aligned enough to execute even when you disagree. If you're too close and you become a yes person, you don't add value. If you're too independent and you look like you're running your own company inside the company, that's also not good. If you get too focused on alignment and you suppress the dissent that keeps the company from making avoidable mistakes, also a challenge. The CEO relationship is the one where getting the balance wrong has a highest blast radius. And it doesn't just affect you, it ripples through every team that reports to you. The stakes are real. When this relationship breaks, it rarely stays contained. The exec team senses it, the board senses it, your directs sense it, and they start hedging. Let's talk about some of those different types of CEOs. One of the ones I've had direct experience with is the founder developer CEO, who still has very strong opinions about technology choices and how things should be built. He was an effective developer in the way that he built code. That creates a very specific dynamic. So I'm the CTO. I'm supposed to own technology strategy, but the person I report to can and does have technical opinions. The skill there isn't winning arguments. It's figuring out which of the CEO's opinions come from deep product instinct you should listen to, and which come from how they built things a while ago and haven't updated. So when your CEO built version 1, they have some opinions that are wired differently than a CEO who came up through like sales or marketing. Some of those opinions are gold. Some of them are artifacts. And your job is to figure out which is which and do it without being dismissive. And I can tell you, having worked for somebody like this who was a brilliant product mind, an exceptionally speedy developer, but whose approach to building code worked well for them, but wasn't necessarily the kind of thing you want to build an organization around. Having to navigate that and acknowledge this person's deep experience, deep product understanding, and understanding that they're the reason why you're there because they've been so successful, while also finding ways to move things forward in a better way for how you need to go forward from there, while respecting their opinion and making sure you're incorporating their ideas and knowing where you can challenge and where maybe you hold off or maybe you back off. That took a lot of working through it with that person and finding the areas that they care deeply about and finding the areas where they acknowledge their own lack of knowledge. And so gave me opportunity to say, okay, well, I'm going to push forward in this area and get us going in a better direction there. And I'm going to leave this area alone for now. I also worked for a founder, developer, CEO who wasn't broadly technical, who was very narrowly technical and selectively deep. So that was a very different dynamic. He was exceptionally interested in technology and deeply knowledgeable in specific aspects of it, but didn't necessarily understand the full platform or claim to at the level that I did. This created a little bit of a challenge where the CEO felt qualified to weigh in on technical decisions. And in some areas, they had more depth of knowledge than I did. Certainly, as a CTO, we've talked a lot about this. I'm very broadly technical. I was working for somebody who was very deeply technical, but not very broad. So in those areas, 100% defer. And I was lucky in the case of the other areas, he didn't claim to know that stuff. And so I had a lot more room to maneuver around that. But that deep understanding sometimes had gaps into that broader area that they didn't quite recognize. So how to approach that with them and being careful how I fill those gaps. If I went to the CEO and said, well, actually, correcting the founder in their own company, again, their success is the reason I have a job, I'm going to lose trust really fast. But if I don't fill those gaps, if I don't address those areas, decisions get made on incomplete information. So that's a whole different type of relationship you have to navigate. Then there's the operator CEO. These are CEOs who are completely hands-off on technology. They didn't come from that. They didn't understand it. They didn't claim to. That sounds like freedom. It sounds like, wow, I've got a ton of space to work in. But the problem is it often isn't. When the CEO doesn't understand technology deeply, they have no context for evaluating whether a problem is serious, whether a timeline is realistic, or why something failed. Freedom without shared understanding means the CEO swings between ignoring problems in technology and overreacting to them. So when the CEO is hands-off on tech, you think you have autonomy. What you actually have is a CEO who is surprised when something goes wrong, and surprised CEOs don't make good decisions. And in that world, you have to be very transparent. You have to be explaining things. You have to not surprise them and hope that they're paying attention. So when you say, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem, this is going to be a problem, and then it becomes a problem, they say, you said it was going to be a problem, you were right. Okay, we're ready for it, or I'm not surprised about it, instead of, I don't remember you saying this was going to be a problem, or I didn't understand what you meant when you said that this was going to be a problem. These CEOs are great if you can establish a level of trust with them, and that trust is earned, it's not given. If you can establish a level of trust where they understand that you are, as we talked about in the last episode, owning your area and taking responsibility, being proactive, and being transparent, that'll work. Even if things go wrong, you're going to start from a place of trust. Even if you make a mistake, which you do, and you honestly own it, you talk about how you're going to fix it, and you fix it, you maintain that trust. So it's good and it's bad in that area. I want to talk about one more type of CEO, which is the visionary. The visionary can also be any of the types of CEOs that I've already mentioned. And when I say visionary, imagine I'm doing air quotes, especially for a founder that you're coming to work for them. There's something behind that vision. They have created something that is grown big enough to employ you. So got to acknowledge that, and you got to understand that first and foremost. Where I get into the air quotes is they've had a good idea, they've been able to capitalize on it, and then sometimes they think they have lots of other good ideas. Founders are, by nature, entrepreneurial, and they are thinking all the time of new ideas. That's how they found companies. If I was really good at that, I'd be doing a founder podcast instead of a CTO podcast. So acknowledge that you have to respect that. That said, you're in a position where you're trying to take the product that makes the company money and you're trying to grow that product because that's what your job is. And the CEO is trying to generate new ideas constantly and get them staffed. And how do you work with that? How do you handle that? Oh, we should do this now. We should also do this. We should also do that. The danger is if you follow the CEO and try and support them on all the different directions they want to go, you may actually starve the core business, which then gets you into trouble with the board instead of the CEO. It's not that one type is best or more successful than others. The question is, do you understand which type you're working with, and have you adopted your approach to match your CEO? I have a framework I'm going to call the 4 foundations of CEO trust. They are competence, candor, commitment, and context. You know I like alliteration. So competence. Does the CEO believe you know your domain and can deliver results? This is the most obvious foundation and the one most technical leaders assume they have covered. But competence in the CEO's eyes isn't about your technical depth. It's about whether you can translate technical reality into business terms, whether your teams ship, and whether you catch problems before they become crises. Your CEO doesn't evaluate your competence the way your engineers do. They evaluate it by whether the things you said would happen have actually happened. This is where a lot of CTOs get into trouble. They're strong technical leaders of their organization, but the rest of the business doesn't understand what's going on in technology work. We've talked about this in prior episodes. And you lose a perception of competence because it seems like your teams are not delivering to the way the rest of the company wants them to. Candor. Does the CEO hear the truth from you, including the things they don't want to hear? This is the hardest foundation to build and the easiest to lose. CEOs are surrounded by people who have incentives to shade the truth. If you become one of them, you lose the thing that makes you the most valuable. But candor without judgment is just complaining. Candor means, here's the real situation, here's what I think we should do about it, and here's what I need from you. Candor also means telling the CEO when they're wrong about something in your domain and doing it in a way they can hear, not in front of the board, not in a group setting, privately, with data and with a proposed alternative. We talked about not challenging the CEO in the demystifying board meetings episode and the importance of never surprising the CEO in the room. Commitment. When a decision is made, does the CEO trust that you will execute fully, even if you disagreed? This is the one that separates senior leaders from everyone else. Disagree and commit is easy to say and genuinely hard to do. It means your team never hears you undermine the decision. It means you run at it with full effort, not with one foot out the door waiting to say, I told you so. If your team can tell you disagree with the decision you're supposed to be executing, you've already failed commitment. Your behavior teaches the organization whether decisions are real or negotiable. The last is context. Does the CEO understand enough about your world to evaluate your judgment fairly? And do you understand enough about theirs? This is the one most people miss. Competence, candor, and commitment can all be undermined if you and the CEO are operating from different mental models of how the business works. For a technical leader, building context means constantly translating between the engineering world and the business world, not dumbing things down, but making the connections visible. We need to replatform means nothing to most CEOs. Our current architecture limits how fast we can ship features customers are asking for, and that's contributing to churn. Means everything. It also means understanding what the CEO is dealing with that you don't see. Board pressure, investor expectations, competitive threats they're tracking, the political dynamics of the rest of the exec team. When the CEO makes a decision that seems wrong to you, the first question to ask is, what context do they have that I don't? A great book around this is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. You've heard, I'm sure, many people recommend that. That book is great, especially in its conceptualizing of the idea that absence of trust is the foundation of dysfunction. Trust without shared context is fragile because misunderstandings erode it even when both sides have good intention. So, how do you build and maintain that relationship with your CEO? Establish the communication rhythm early. Like I said, the CEOs have very narrow windows into your part of the world because they are constantly looking across the organization and jumping into different pieces. Weekly one-on-ones with the CEO are non-negotiable. Protect them. If the CEO cancels frequently, that's a signal you need to address directly. Use that one-on-one to pre-wire. Nothing that comes up in a staff meeting or board meeting should be the first time the CEO is hearing it from you. And lead with conclusions, not contexts. CEOs are busy. Tell them what you think, then offer the supporting detail if they want to dig in. And it's okay to ask, what do you think I should do here? That should be generally rare. They don't know your part of the business as well as you do. Adapt to the CEO type. Don't fight it. If you have a founder, developer, CEO with strong opinions, invest heavily in understanding which opinions are load-bearing and which are habitual. Pick your battles. When you push back, make it about data and outcomes, not taste. If you have an operator CEO who's hands-off on tech, your job is to build context proactively, not reactively. Don't wait for the crisis to explain the state of the platform. Bring regular, concise updates that connect technical health to business outcomes. Make the CEO literate enough to evaluate your judgment without having to evaluate your code. If you have a visionary CEO, your job is to be the bridge between the vision and what's actually buildable. This means sometimes being the person who says, not yet or not like that, which is uncomfortable but necessary. And you also have to be careful that you can't say no all the time. If you are a wall of no to every one of the CEO's ideas, they will go and find someone to replace you who's willing to take the journey with them. You have to respect that they have these ideas and that they really want to invest in them. So you got to figure out which ones you can invest in. And then that gives you more credibility when you say, we can't do this one right now. Handle disagreement deliberately. Disagree before the decision is made. Bring data, not just opinions. Frame it as, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'd recommend, rather than saying, I don't think that's right. If you lose the argument, commit fully. Execute as if it were your idea. Then if it doesn't work, you've earned the standing to say, let's revisit this because you gave it a real shot. If a pattern develops where you're consistently overruled on things in your domain, that's a totally different conversation. That's a role fit conversation. And we'll talk about that more a little bit later. In one job as a CTO, I saw the company going in a direction that I didn't think was a good direction to go in. And I did my job. I raised my concerns. Those concerns were heard. We kept moving in that direction. I then continued to advocate. It felt like the decision hadn't been made yet. But at a certain point, I realized I was the only one advocating going a different direction. And I could tell that my arguments were being heard less and less until another member of the executive team pulled me aside at some point and said, this one's over. This is the way we're going now. I realized I hadn't read the room right. And I had to very much switch into, okay, I'm committed now. I have voiced my disagreement. I understand this is the way we're going. And so now I'm supporting this 100%. Watch for the strategic vacuum. If you find yourself being the only person on the exec team thinking past the current quarter, writing strategy documents, doing competitive analysis, pushing the team to plans for what's coming, that is both valuable and dangerous. It's valuable because somebody has to do it. It's dangerous because if the CEO isn't co-owning that work, it can create resentment on both sides. You feel like you're doing their job and they may feel like you're overstepping. Surface this directly. I notice I'm the one driving a lot of the longer term strategic thinking. I'm happy to do it, but I want to make sure we're aligned on that. Honestly, where I've lived this exact problem is if you have experience working in different companies, some of which are operated better, you come into a company and they aren't as organized, they aren't as structured, and you've seen that structure be very helpful and very valuable. And so you become an advocate for it. And one of the ways you do that is by doing it yourself. If the exec team doesn't do planning and you come in and go, I've seen planning work so good, I'm going to make sure the planning happens, they may not appreciate that. This company exists because whatever they've been doing has been working for them thus far. If you try and become that operator, that's going to step on a lot of toes. If you feel yourself doing that, surface it directly. I notice I'm the one driving a lot of the longer term strategic thinking. I'm happy to do it, but I want to make sure we're aligned on that being part of my role. And I'd love your input on the direction. This is a conversation you have with the CEO. If you're the only person in the company thinking past this quarter, you're either doing something very valuable or you're setting yourself up for a very lonely argument when the quarter ends. How do you know when that CEO relationship is eroding? By the time most leaders recognize as trust has eroded, it's often too late to repair easily. Here are some signs that the CEO is losing confidence in you. They start asking your directs for information instead of you. This one's a little bit weird because I actively encourage my CEO to ask some of my directs questions. I want to be on the thread, but I don't want to be the relay between my boss and the head of security or my boss and the head of data. They both work for me, but I want to give them visibility to the CEO. I want the CEO to be aware of the value that they're bringing because someday they're going to be a CISO or they're going to be a CDO, and I want to help make that happen. So there's that. And then you've pre-wired this relationship where the CEO feels comfortable asking somebody that works for you for extra information because they know that person has it, and that's a positive thing. And then they're routing around you because they don't want to include you in the discussion. Where that may just show up is, are you on the CC or not? Another sign that they're losing confidence is they start bringing in outside advisors or consultants for things that you should own, things that aren't part of your domain. Your one-on-one gets shorter, less frequent, or more transactional. You find out about decisions that affect your team after they've been made. You weren't consulted, you weren't part of the discussion. That happening at the executive level is a massive red flag. You stop getting invited to meetings you should be in because your contribution isn't considered helpful. Another major red flag. Signs you're losing trust in the CEO because this is a bidirectional relationship. You start building a case file of bad decisions, collecting evidence for an argument you haven't made yet. You find yourself explaining the CEO's decisions to your team in ways that distance you from them. Well, the CEO wants us to, as opposed to saying, hey, we need to do this. You're spending more energy managing around the CEO than working with them. And you stop bringing up problems because you don't think they'll be heard. If you catch yourself translating the CEO's decisions into something that your team can stomach, that's a sign that the relationship needs attention. You're not a translator. You're supposed to be a partner. Let's talk about what's going on with CEOs, the human aspect of this. Most CEOs at growth stage and mid-stage companies are under a tremendous amount of pressure from the board, from investors, and from the founders if they're not the founder. They're being evaluated quarterly in ways that most of the exec team doesn't see. A CEO who takes responsibility for a struggling function, like pulling customer success under themselves because the existing structure isn't working, is often doing that because they feel personally accountable to the board for fixing it. Understanding that pressure doesn't mean excusing bad behavior from a CEO, but it does mean adjusting your approach. We've talked about this in previous episodes, very specifically the board meeting episode. CEOs are under a lot of pressure, and they will not necessarily share that with you for the same reason that if you're under pressure from the CEO, you're not necessarily sharing that with your team because that's not appropriate. If the board is pressuring the CEO about something going on in the company, they're not going to blame the board, just like you're not going to blame the CEO. The board is pressuring the CEO because something's wrong, and the CEO is taking ownership of it, taking accountability for it, and working to fix it. If you're feeling that pressure and you don't understand why the CEO all of a sudden cares deeply about a very specific thing, oftentimes it's because that's reached the board level. Keep that in mind. You can't expect, even when you have a great relationship with the CEO is not going to throw the board under the bus. And if you have a great relationship with the CEO, sometimes they'll tell you, board is aware of this and they've raised the priority on it. But still, that's not something you can talk about to your team, just like you can't say the CEO is making me do this. You can't say the board is making the CEO do this. You have to take responsibility, just like the CEO is taking responsibility. So if you sometimes see unusual behavior or what you might consider bad behavior or weird pressure, understand that there might be something going on that you don't have visibility into. That is the reason for it. Your relationship with the CEO sets the tone for every other executive relationship. If the CRO sees that you can disagree with the CEO and still be respected, they'll feel safer doing the same. If they see you get shut down, they'll learn to keep quiet. The CEO-CTO dynamic models what honesty and partnership look like for the whole leadership team. And I can tell you it's the other way around as well. When I've seen CMOs or CPOs disagree with the CEO and the CEO shuts them down, I am way less likely to disagree because I see what happens. This is a group. You see this happen in a group, you adjust. If you can do that well, you give permission to the rest of the executive team to do that as well. Cross-functional friction often traces back that CEO relationship. When the CTO and CEO aren't aligned on priorities, it shows up as confusion between product and engineering, tension between sales and product, or marketing makes promises that engineering can't deliver. The root cause isn't the cross-functional conflict. The root cause is unclear alignment at the top. Most of the org friction I've seen at companies traces back to some version of the executive team not being aligned, and most of the time that starts with that CEO relationship. Sometimes the relationship is no longer working and no amount of candor or commitment is going to fix it. This is where we talk about it being a role fit problem, not a relationship problem. If the CEO constantly overrides you in your domain without engaging your reasoning, that's a sign. The CEO's values and yours are fundamentally misaligned on how to treat people, how to make decisions, or what the company is for. That's a sign. You've surfaced the issues directly multiple times and nothing changes. Another sign. Or you realize you're staying because of inertia or compensation, not because you believe in the direction of the company. All those are signs that you are not the right person for the role. And sometimes it's understanding that you are not the right person for the role, not that the CEO is not the right person for the role. CEO might also not be the right person for the role, but your ability to get rid of the CEO is dramatically lower than your ability to find a new role for yourself. If you're not that far gone, can you repair the trust? It requires both sides. Be direct. I think our working relationship isn't where it needs to be, and I'd like to talk about what we can do about it. That's a very hard sentence to say, but it's the only honest one. Propose specific changes, not vague commitments. I'd like us to use our one-on-one to pre-wire any staffing or budget decisions before they go to the broader team. That's actionable. We should communicate more is not. If you've agreed to specific changes, give it 90 days of real effort before deciding it's not working. If you've done the work and the trust still isn't there, leaving is a legitimate and sometimes necessary decision. It's not failure. It's recognizing a fit problem. Your worst outcome is staying in a broken CEO relationship and letting it erode your judgment, your energy, and the trust of your team. You can recover from a bad quarter. You can recover from a bad hire. It's very hard to recover from a CEO relationship where neither side trusts the other's judgment. If you're feeling that, they're feeling it too. Every CEO I've worked for, if that alignment isn't there, if they're losing the trust in your judgment, they're already thinking about who they're going to hire to replace you. I promise you that. So you can try and repair it, but if it isn't getting repaired, you should be looking for your next opportunity, because by the time you've decided it's not repairable, they've probably already made that decision and already maybe interviewing people. As a newer CTO than I am today, I thought the CEO relationship was mostly about competence. If I delivered results, the relationship would be fine. That turned out to be incomplete. Competence is table stakes. The relationship lives or dies on candor, commitment, and especially shared context. I also used to think that disagreeing with the CEO was inherently risky, something to be done sparingly and carefully. Over time, I learned that the opposite is true. A CEO who doesn't hear honest pushback from their CTO is flying blind. The risk is not pushing back. You just have to do it in the right way. Working with founder developer CEOs taught me something specific. The CEO's technical opinions aren't obstacles to manage. They're signals about what the CEO values. Learning to decode those signals to distinguish between I built this and I'm attached to it, and I've been watching customers and I see something you don't, made me a much better partner to founder CEOs. I used to treat the CEO relationship like a reporting relationship. Now I treat it like an operating system. You design for it, you invest in it, you monitor it, and you repair it when it breaks. And if you don't, everything that runs on top of it eventually crashes. The CEO relationship is the highest leverage relationship in your career as a technology leader. It determines your scope, your influence, your ability to protect your team, and ultimately whether you can do the job you were hired to do. The test for all of you listening is, in your next one-on-one with the CEO, ask yourself 4 questions. Do they hear the truth from me? When we disagree, do we have a reliable process for working through it? Do I understand what they're dealing with that I don't see? And does my team see a partnership when they look at us, or a hierarchy? If the answer to any of those questions is uncomfortable, you have work to do. And that work starts with you, not with the CEO. Your CEO can't fix this relationship by themselves, and neither can you. But you can be the one that starts the conversations, and in most cases, you should be. If you're currently working for a CEO, I hope that's helpful for you if you hope someday to work for a CEO, or even if you're a member of a technology team and you're trying to understand why your CTO or your VPE does things in some of the ways that they do, and understanding them better. I hope that's helpful. I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will see you back here in 2 weeks on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.